My name is Magnolia Delaney. I am 79 years old. And at this age, I should be watching hummingbirds by my window, sipping warm tea from my favorite chipped mug, and falling asleep in peace. Instead, I'm sitting here with a hand on my belly, trembling, pregnant, carrying the child of my late husband's brother. You don't need to believe it. I wouldn't believe it either, if I weren't the one living it. It all began 7 months after my husband Jasper passed in his sleep. 49 years we were married. He was my first kiss, my only man, my entire compass in this world. Losing him was like losing the oxygen in my lungs. I withered. Our house in Fayetteville, quiet, wooden, plain, felt like a tomb without him. I tried to keep living. I joined the quilting group at the church, baked banana bread I didn't eat, and watered his garden like he asked me to in his will. I was surviving. And then Chester moved in. Chester, Jasper's younger brother, was never right. Always watching. Always scheming. He'd been the black sheep, disappearing for years, only showing up to funerals and inheritance meetings. So, when he offered to help me around the house, I said no. He showed up anyway. With 2 bags and no shame. Jasper told me to look out for you, he lied. Said not to let you be alone. I wanted to scream. But grief makes you quiet. Weak. Guilty for saying no when someone offers a hand. The first few weeks, he was helpful. Fixed the broken gate. Made breakfast. Smiled too much. Looked too long. Then came the nights. I remember the first night I woke up and saw him standing at the edge of my bed. Just standing. Staring. I froze. Couldn't breathe. He mumbled, "You remind me of him," and walked away. That was when the visits began. When the nightmares turned into real bruises. He would whisper Jasper's name while hurting me, like it made it okay. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? I was a grieving old woman. He was family. People think old women don't get hurt like this. That we're invisible. And then, the test came back positive. I laughed. I screamed. I sat on the cold bathroom tiles for 2 hours until my legs went numb. Pregnant? At 79? The doctor said it was a miracle. I said it was a curse. I tried to hide it, but my body was changing. My soul was cracking. Chester noticed. His eyes lit up with a joy I hadn't seen since Jasper's funeral. "You're carrying my legacy," he said, stroking my hand with fingers that once choked the life out of me. "You and we'll raise it together." That night, I locked the bedroom door with a hammer and a chair and didn't sleep at all. I stared out the window until sunrise, praying for an answer. Praying for Jasper to send me one more sign. Anything. And then it came, taped to my front porch. A single white envelope. My name scrawled on it. Inside, a black and white photo of Chester. In prison uniform. From 1982. Stamped on the back in red. Repeat offender. Sexual violence. My blood turned to ice. I'd let a wolf into my home. Into my bed. Into my body. I turned to look through the living room window. And that's when I saw him. Standing by the mailbox. Smiling. Holding a matchbox. And behind him, smoke. Smoke coming from my barn. Was he burning my only memory of Jasper? Was this his warning? I ran to the door, but it was too late. Chester was already walking back toward the house. And this time, he had something in his hand. Something wrapped in cloth. Something dripping. I stepped back. Heart pounding. Because I finally understood. I wasn't just carrying a child. I was carrying evidence. And Chester wasn't going to let me live long enough to tell anyone. I locked the door. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the bolt. My mind kept going back to what I saw in Chester's hand, something bundled in cloth, wet at the edges, dripping onto the grass like it had a heartbeat of its own. I stumbled back into the hallway and pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Only the wind brushing against the porch and the slow creak of an old swing. I closed my eyes and whispered Jasper's name under my breath. Please, tell me what to do. But all I could hear was the fire crackling in the distance, and Chester's boots on the gravel. That smell, the smoke from the barn, it wasn't just wood. It was memories. Jasper's rocking chair, our wedding quilt, his father's Bible. All of it. Gone. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't afford to be loud. Not yet. Let me take you back to where it all started. Before the pregnancy, before the bruises, before Chester even showed his wicked face at my door. Back when love was real. Back when I was just Magnolia Woodrow, the soft-spoken girl from Crowville, Arkansas, who thought she'd found a forever kind of love with Jasper Delaney. I met Jasper when I was 16, at a state fair. He was selling kettle corn with his cousin, and I was selling quilts with my mother. He had kind eyes and a lopsided grin. He offered me a handful of popcorn and said, "If I marry you, will you stop pretending to be mad every time I smile?" I never pretended after that. We were married by 18. Moved into a small fixer-upper house on his daddy's farmland. Jasper worked sunup to sundown while I tended the house, baked, sewed, wrote in my journal. The house was full of love, warm, raw, sometimes loud, but always honest. But we had one sorrow: no children. Year after year we tried. We prayed. We held hands through doctor visits and whispered hope into pillows. And when my body finally told me no, Jasper kissed my cheek and said, "Then we'll fill this house with music and plants instead." And we did. But it made me self-conscious. Made me feel like I'd failed him. Especially around his family. Especially around Chester. Even back then, Chester had a way of looking at me that made me shiver. Like I was a trophy Jasper didn't deserve. Like he was waiting for something to go wrong. When Jasper and I hit our 25th anniversary, Chester didn't send a card. Didn't call. But he showed up 2 weeks later, uninvited, drunk, and broke. Jasper offered him the couch for one night. It turned into 3 weeks. And every time I walked into a room, Chester stopped talking. Like I'd interrupted some secret. One night, Jasper found Chester in the garage, rifling through his old war medals, drunk off his boots. They fought. Loud. I stayed upstairs, clenching my robe like it could keep the walls from falling. Jasper made him leave that night. Said, "You're poison, Chester, and I won't let you stain my life." We never saw him again, until Jasper's funeral. And even then, he stood at the back in a cheap black jacket, smiling, grinning like he'd won something. Now, years later, he was in my home again. And this time, there was no Jasper to protect me. Just me. And this thing growing inside me. A reminder of every night he stole from me. A symbol of power he didn't deserve. I moved away from the door and tiptoed toward the kitchen. I knew he'd broken the window latch by the pantry. I'd seen him fiddling with it last week. My plan was simple: slip out while he was still outside. Run across the field to the Higgins place. Ring their bell like a madwoman. But when I turned the corner, he was already inside. Just standing there. Inside my kitchen. Holding Jasper's hammer. His shirt was wet, drenched in smoke and God knows what else. But his face. Calm. Too calm. "You locked the front," he said quietly, tilting his head like I was a stray cat. "I thought we were past that, Maggie." I took a step back. He took one forward. "Where's the cloth?" I asked. "What were you carrying?" His lips curled. "A surprise." He reached into his coat pocket. I gasped. But it wasn't a weapon. It was Jasper's pocket watch. The one buried with him. I screamed. How did you? Oh, sweetheart, Chester laughed softly. Do you really think I never visited him? The grave. Please. Jasper always had something I wanted. Always. I shook. Get out of my house. I own this house, he hissed. Jasper left it to us in the will. You didn't read the fine print, did you? He was lying. He had to be. But my body, it couldn't gamble on whether that was true or not. I turned and ran, fast as I could for a woman my age with a baby in her belly and trauma in her bones. I made it to the back door before he grabbed my shoulder and spun me. You can't run now, he said. Not when you're carrying my blood. I'm carrying evidence, I snapped. He froze. And that's when I knew I still had power. I pulled away, kicked him hard in the shin, and made it through the door. I ran barefoot across the backyard, through the field, scraping my feet on broken stalks and dried thorns. My breath came in wheezes. My knees burned. But I didn't stop. Not when I heard him shouting behind me. Not even when I tripped and fell face first into the dirt. Because up ahead, I saw headlights. The Higgins truck. They were home. And maybe, just maybe, I still had time. Time to tell someone. Time to save myself. But as I crawled toward the porch, the last thing I saw was Chester's shadow, coming fast behind me. And in his hand, again, that cloth bundle. Still dripping. Still soaked. Still hiding the truth I hadn't yet seen. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the field. I was staring at a ceiling fan spinning slow above me, its blades coated in dust and cobwebs. The room smelled of mildew and engine grease. The walls were bare plywood. My arms were tied. My ankles too. Not tight, but tight enough. And then I heard him whistling. That same sick tune he always hummed while fiddling with Jasper's toolbox. A tune that once meant he was fixing something. Now it meant he was breaking me. I tried to scream, but my throat was dry, cracked like desert stone. I moved my head just enough to see the room. An old garage, maybe. Tools on the wall. A mattress on the floor. A single window covered in foil and duct tape. And in the corner, a crib. A crib. Painted pale blue. Rocking. I shut my eyes and begged God to make it a dream. Magnolia, you're awake. Chester's voice echoed like syrup and poison. He stepped into view with a tin cup of water and a grin that made my skin crawl. I was beginning to worry about you. And the little one. He held the cup to my lips. I turned my head. He didn't force it. Just set it on the chair beside me. You're gonna need your strength. The baby's growing. Doctor says everything looks good. What doctor? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Oh, I got friends, he smirked. People owe me favors. I told him you were my wife. He didn't ask questions. Didn't need to. He said you're healthy. And special. Special. I spat. I'm 79. This isn't special. It's abuse. It's hell. He leaned in close, and I smelled the smoke still clinging to his skin. No, Maggie. It's destiny. I felt bile rise in my throat. You don't get to rewrite my life like this, I hissed. You don't get to turn me into your story. But I already have, he whispered. You were mine the moment Jasper died. Maybe even before. He never deserved you. Always prancing around like some hero. You were always too soft, too beautiful, too loyal. He paused and stared at my belly. Now you're part of me. And once the baby comes, we're leaving this town. Starting fresh. Somewhere cold. You always said you liked snow, didn't you? I couldn't respond. My whole body felt like a cage closing in. I waited until he stepped out, probably to heat something or take a call. Then I looked around the room again, this time with intention. There. A nail sticking out near the floorboard. I twisted, inched closer, wiggled my wrist down toward it. The rope scraped. Skin tore. I didn't care. I kept going, inch by inch, until, snap, my right hand was free. I worked quickly, unraveled the rest. By the time Chester came back through the door with a steaming bowl, I was hiding behind the metal shelves in the corner. He looked around, confused. Magnolia. I crept. He stepped closer. Don't play games. I'll find you. And then I swung. A wrench. Big. Rusted. Heavy. Right across the back of his head. He dropped to one knee. I didn't stop. Another hit. And another. He slumped. Still breathing, but dazed. I didn't wait. I ran. I burst out the side door and into the night. The air was cold, heavy with the coming rain. I had no shoes, no coat, just a body older than most trees and a baby I never asked for. But I ran. Through a back alley, through bushes, through pain, until I saw lights. A diner. Millie's Diner. Open 24 hours. I slammed through the door, shaking, bleeding and wild-eyed. A waitress dropped her tray. A man gasped. Someone grabbed their phone. Please, I sobbed. Call the sheriff. I was kidnapped. My name is Magnolia Delaney. Please, my husband's brother. He's trying to keep me hidden. He made me. I touched my belly, and for the first time, I wept. In front of strangers. In front of God. In front of myself. Because I knew. This wasn't just trauma anymore. It was a war. The next thing I remember, I was in a hospital room, with officers outside the door. The sheriff, an old friend of Jasper's, came in quietly, hat in hand. Magnolia, he said. We found the place. And Chester. He's in custody. I didn't speak. He added, softly, he had a scrapbook. Of you. Of Jasper. Of plans. This wasn't a snap. He's been fixated for decades. I know, I whispered. He looked at my belly. Do you want to talk about options? I nodded, but my eyes said no, because something in me had changed. This baby wasn't his. Not in my heart. It was mine now. And maybe, just maybe, the final piece of Jasper left behind was me becoming something stronger than I'd ever been. I stayed in the hospital for 5 days. Long enough for the bruises to fade from black to yellow. Long enough for the nurses to stop looking at me like I might crumble if they asked the wrong question. I didn't speak much. Not to the social worker, not to the detective, not even to Pastor Grace when she visited with her peach cobbler and tight-lipped prayers. Everyone wanted to help. But no one could undo what had been done. On the 6th morning, I was released into protective care, a temporary home with a retired nurse named Loretta, just outside of town. She was quiet, soft-spoken, lived in a wide cottage with flower wallpaper and a sleepy beagle named Button. She'd lost her own husband in '89 and never remarried. We didn't say much to each other. But she never made me feel small. Never asked why I didn't fight back sooner. Never looked at my swollen belly with pity. She just made me tea, crocheted quietly, and left a Bible open by the window every morning without pushing it in my face. It was the safest I'd felt in months. Still, every night, when the house got quiet, I would lie awake and wonder what would happen if Chester got out. I kept replaying the last thing I saw before I ran, his scrapbook. The sheriff had said it was full of plans. Photos. Cutouts. Maps. He'd been watching me long before Jasper died. He knew things about my schedule, about our home, even about Jasper's health. That realization made my stomach turn. Had he helped Jasper die? Poison? Stress? Interference with his medication? I had no proof. But my heart wouldn't rest. One afternoon, Loretta brought in an envelope that had been forwarded from my old mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. Typed. Clean. No name, just 6 words. You're still carrying my victory. See. I dropped it. My hands shook so hard that Button barked from across the room. Loretta came in, saw the paper, and without a word, took it to the fireplace and burned it. Then she knelt in front of me. "You're not alone, Magnolia," she said. "Not anymore. Let him play his mind games. But if he comes here, I have a shotgun and no patience." That made me smile. The first real smile in weeks. But I knew I had to do more than hide. I had to understand. So, with Loretta's help, I requested the sheriff's permission to see the evidence file. I was surprised they allowed it. The folder was thick. Inside, photos from Chester's garage, pages from his scrapbook, old court records sealed decades ago, and, most chilling, copies of medical reports from when he was 25. He'd been accused of assault before. Twice. One case was dismissed when the victim disappeared. The other, settled quietly with a payout from his uncle, a wealthy oil man. It made me sick. All these years, this man had been free, untouched, watching me, waiting. And now, even behind bars, he was still trying to pull strings. I had to do something, not just for myself, not just for the baby, but for Jasper. I began writing. A journal at first. Then letters. Letters to every woman I'd known in town. Letters to the paper. Letters to the mayor. But none of them were angry. They were truthful. Simple. Plain. Powerful. I wrote, "My name is Magnolia Delaney. I am 79 years old. I was attacked by the man who claimed to love my husband like a brother. I am carrying his child, but I am not his victim. I am my own, and I will not disappear quietly." The local newspaper ran it as a front-page column. The town went silent. Then it roared. Calls flooded the sheriff's office. Donations came to Loretta's house. One woman even showed up crying on our porch, saying Chester had tried to lure her into his car when she was 15. My words had cracked something open, and for the first time, I felt power return to my bones. I wasn't just surviving. I was remembering who I was before the silence, before the shame. I began attending town meetings, not as a victim, as a force. They offered me a place to stay in the women's shelter until Chester's trial was done, but I said no. I asked to speak at the courtroom myself. The judge hesitated, but eventually allowed it. When the trial date arrived, I wore Jasper's mother's church dress. Soft lilac, modest, but ironed with pride. I stood in the witness box, hand on the Bible, and when they asked if I swore to tell the truth, I looked straight into Chester's eyes. And I said, "I've been telling the truth for 79 years. It's time someone listened." He didn't blink, didn't flinch, but I saw the twitch in his jaw. I gave my statement, clear, sharp, not a single tear. Then I turned to leave. As I passed his chair, he muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "You'll never forget me." I paused, leaned close, and whispered, "That's what obituaries are for." Then I walked out, head held high. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Because in that moment, I realized something far more terrifying than Chester's obsession. He still had secrets I hadn't uncovered. Secrets buried not in the scrapbook or the garage, but in Jasper's death. And I wasn't going to rest until I found out what really happened the night my husband died. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a heavy groan, but the real weight pressing down on my chest had nothing to do with the trial. It had everything to do with what Chester said. "You'll never forget me." He wasn't talking about what he did to me. He was talking about Jasper. That night, back at Loretta's house, I pulled down the old photo box I'd kept sealed since Jasper's funeral. I'd always said I wasn't strong enough to face it. Truth was, I was terrified of what I might see. There were photos from our honeymoon in Denver, Jasper with grease-stained hands rebuilding the barn door, Christmas mornings in flannel pajamas, all smiles. But in the bottom of the box was something I hadn't remembered putting there. A notebook. Jasper's. Brown leather cover, dog-eared edges, and a faint smell of tobacco and motor oil. I opened it. Page after page of dates, garden notes, tool measurements, repair sketches, and then something strange. A list of medications. And next to each, he had scribbled tiny changes in handwriting, feeling drowsy, vision blurred, not right today. Then one final line under the last entry. Mag said the bottle was new. But I didn't open it. I stared at those words. He hadn't opened the bottle, but he'd taken the pills. And those pills had made him feel strange. Who gave them to him? My heart dropped. Chester. Chester had been in the house that week. He'd stopped by to fix the lawnmower, brought over food, watched Jasper swallow his meds. My hands went cold. I flipped back a few pages, desperate for more. Saw Chester digging near the fence line. Said it was for drainage. But he never finished. Why did he take my spare house key? It hit me like a slap. Jasper suspected him, but didn't want to alarm me. He was trying to protect me, even in silence. I needed help. Real help. So the next morning, I called Ruthie Adair, the town's only investigative journalist. She'd written stories no one else would touch. Corruption, missing persons, police misconduct. She was fierce and unafraid, just like the woman I was trying to become. I invited her to Loretta's. She arrived in ripped jeans, with a tape recorder and questions that could cut glass. "You're telling me you think your husband was murdered by his brother?" "I don't think," I said. "I know. I just don't have the proof yet." She took the notebook gently from my hands and flipped through. "May I photograph this?" "Yes." "And would you let me record our talk?" "Yes. But only if you promise me something. Anything. Tell the truth. No pity. No fluff. I want people to know exactly who Chester is. And what he stole from me." Ruthie nodded. And that afternoon, we spoke for 4 hours. By the end, she hugged me. Fiercely. "You don't need to just survive, Magnolia. You're gonna bury him with the truth." 3 days later, her article exploded. Suspicious death? Widow claims husband's brother may have poisoned veteran for inheritance. The town turned upside down. Old neighbors came forward, remembering strange things Chester said during Jasper's funeral. The sheriff reopened Jasper's autopsy. They exhumed the body with my consent. I stood at the edge of the cemetery while they lifted my husband's casket from the earth, my knees buckling. "Don't look," Loretta whispered. But I had to. I had to watch the truth rise from the ground like a ghost demanding justice. 2 weeks passed. Then the results came in. Jasper's system contained elevated levels of a rarely used sedative. One that wasn't prescribed by his doctor. One that can induce cardiac arrest in the elderly if mixed with blood pressure medication. The same sedative was found in Chester's toolbox in the garage, tucked behind a drawer, wrapped in electrical tape. Labeled only with masking tape, "Sleep easy." I sobbed when they told me, not just because it confirmed my worst fear, but because I hadn't protected Jasper when he needed me most. That night, I sat on the porch swing at Loretta's, wrapped in Jasper's old army blanket. The stars above me blurred. The baby inside me kicked for the first time. Not fluttering, kicking, strong, fierce. Like he knew. Like he was angry, too. And that's when the new thought entered my mind, not just about Chester's crimes, but about his motive. He didn't just want me. He wanted everything Jasper had. The house, the land, the inheritance, me. He had tried to erase Jasper from the world so he could replace him. And now, he might try to claim this child as his own legacy. I couldn't allow that, so I made a plan. The next day, I met with a lawyer and estate planner. We redid the will, created a living trust in the baby's name, set up guardianship that excluded Chester by legal order. Then I took one more step. I filed a motion to terminate Chester's parental rights, even if it delayed the case, even if it exposed me to more scrutiny. I had to be the shield Jasper no longer could be, because if there was one thing this journey had taught me, it was that silence feeds monsters. But truth starves them, and the final truth I hadn't yet faced was still buried in one place, Chester's own past. Something deeper, something older. And as Ruthie handed me one last folder from her background check, her eyes narrowed. "You're going to want to sit down for this." I did. And when I opened it, I nearly dropped it. A missing persons report, dated 1969, filed by a young woman in Texas, claiming Chester Delaney assaulted her and left her pregnant. She'd vanished before the case went to court. But her final note to the police was chilling. "If anything happens to me, tell Magnolia Woodrow he's done this before." The paper shook in my hands. That final line, "Tell Magnolia Woodrow he's done this before," repeated in my mind like a drumbeat echoing through a canyon. The air around me grew still, heavy. It felt like the world had tilted sideways. She knew me. Back in 1969, I was barely 23 years old. That was the year I married Jasper. The same year Chester vanished for several months, said he went to work on an oil rig in Texas. He came back thinner, meaner, but quiet. Jasper never asked questions. I never thought to. Until now. Ruthie sat across from me on the porch, watching my face. "Magnolia, do you know who she was?" I shook my head. "No. I don't even know why she'd think I could help. She must have met you, heard of you, or maybe she loved Chester once." I couldn't picture that. Chester and love didn't belong in the same sentence. But the records didn't lie. Her name was Elise Crowder, 20 years old. Reported missing after visiting a courthouse in Lubbock to file charges. She was never seen again. Her case was archived as unsolved disappearance, presumed voluntary. But her note, her plea, it changed everything. I spent that night digging through my memory, trying to find a thread, anything that might tie her to me. And then I remembered something. One moment. Faint. But there. At our wedding reception, a young woman had approached me, timid, dark hair pulled back, holding a small camera. She'd asked to take a photo of me and Jasper under the willow tree. I'd smiled. She'd said, "You're lucky. He's kind." I thought she meant Jasper. Now I knew she didn't. She was trying to warn me. I gasped. I ran to my old wedding album. Page by page, I flipped until I found it. Us, beneath the willow tree. There in the background, almost hidden, was her face. Elise. Soft smile. Sad eyes. She'd been watching. Studying me. and I'd let her slip away. The guilt crushed me. The next morning, I returned to the sheriff's office with Ruthie's folder. I demanded the case be reopened. Sheriff Clay, God bless him, took one look at the note and nodded grimly. I'll contact Lubbock PD. See what's still in their archives. I didn't stop there. I went public again, told Elise's story, wrote a second column for the newspaper. There was another girl, long before me, and she cried out, but no one listened. I will not let her be forgotten. Her name was Elise Crowder. The town rallied. A few days later, an old woman named Beverly Jenkins called the sheriff. Said she once rented a room to a girl named Elise in '69. Said she was running from a man named Chester, Beverly said. Said he promised to kill her if she told anyone. They found bones in a dried-up riverbed just outside Lubbock 3 weeks later. The DNA matched Elise's parents. Ruthie's article made national news. Cold case linked to ongoing sexual assault trial in Arkansas. Former suspect back in the headlines. Suddenly, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, lawyers, women from all over the region came forward. 2 claimed Chester had assaulted them in the '80s but were too scared to go public. One had been a nurse, another a housekeeper. The puzzle wasn't just coming together. It was crashing down like a wall of bricks. But Chester? He pleaded not guilty. Sat in court with his smug little smirk, pretending none of it mattered. He was so sure he'd get away with it again. He didn't know I was no longer afraid of him. I had one more card to play. The baby. The DNA test. It had come in. I opened the envelope on the witness stand during my second testimony. My lawyer nodded. The judge leaned in. I held the paper and said, "This child is not Chester Delaney's." A gasp moved through the courtroom like a wave. I continued. The DNA excludes him completely, which means everything he claimed, his obsession, his fantasy, was based on a lie. Chester stood. "Liar," he shouted. The bailiff restrained him. "You did this on purpose," he growled. "You tricked me. You were with someone else." I stood calmly, looked him in the eyes, and whispered, "No, I was never yours. Not then. Not now. Not ever." The courtroom fell silent. Later, the judge allowed me to share a final statement before sentencing. I stood before the jury and read. To the women who weren't believed, to the girls who ran and never made it home, this is for you. To the men who stood by and said nothing, shame on you. But to the survivors, we are not broken. We are rebuilt. And no matter our age, our scars, our fears, we still matter. I am 79. I am pregnant. I was assaulted. And I will not disappear quietly. Chester was sentenced to life without parole for multiple charges: assault, kidnapping, and now suspected involvement in Elise Crowder's death. I didn't cry when they took him away. I didn't look back. Because I had something more important to face. My own future. And the child who had become not a symbol of pain, but a beacon of purpose. The day Chester was sentenced, the town felt lighter. But my soul didn't. Not yet. Because while justice had its moment, healing was another story. And being 79, carrying a child born of trauma, and stepping into motherhood alone, it made every day feel like walking uphill in winter. People looked at me differently now. Some smiled with sympathy. Others whispered behind coffee cups. A few even crossed the street when I passed, as if the truth I carried was contagious. But I didn't care. Because I wasn't walking for them. I was walking for Jasper. For Elise. For the baby. Still, the weight of what was coming terrified me. The baby was due in 6 weeks. I had chosen not to terminate, Not because I wanted to carry Chester's legacy, but because I knew this child was mine. Biologically, no, but emotionally, completely. When the DNA results came in, revealing that Chester was not the father, my world shook again. The only explanation could be a rare incident from the hospital during the trauma, likely a botched blood transfer or mishandled sample during my early care. Doctors scrambled to explain, some even suspecting long-dormant egg activation due to rare medical conditions. The science didn't matter much. What mattered was that the baby inside me didn't come from hate. He came from hope. I named him August, after Jasper's birth month. I spent my days reading aloud from Jasper's journals, and sitting in the nursery Loretta helped me paint, a soft shade of forest green. The crib sat under a window that faced the field where Jasper once taught me how to grow tomatoes. Life had a strange way of returning in circles. But the peace didn't last long. One Sunday morning, I walked into the diner, Millie's, where I first escaped Chester, to grab a slice of peach pie and tea. A woman at the counter, no older than 40, turned and said coldly, "You should have just gone to a nursing home. What kind of life are you giving that child?" I froze. The waitress behind her dropped her jaw. "Excuse me," the woman continued, louder this time. "That baby's going to be confused. Born into scandal. Raised by an old woman with nothing but shame and trauma." My hands shook. But before I could speak, someone else did. A man. Deep voice. From the far end of the diner. "She's giving him a better life than most kids ever get." The diner fell silent. Everyone turned. He stood slowly, tall and lean, with snow-white hair and a face I hadn't seen in over 40 years. "Leonard Pike." I whispered. He walked toward me, a cane in hand but his eyes still sharp. "Hi, Magnolia," he said softly. "I read your story. I was a friend of Jasper's, back in the Navy. We lost touch, but he always talked about you like you were the sun." I smiled, tears pooling. "He never stopped talking about you either." Leonard turned to the rude woman. "Let me tell you something, ma'am. I've fought in wars. Seen mothers bury babies. Seen kids born into poverty, into addiction, into pain. You want to talk about trauma?" This woman stood in a courtroom and faced her abuser head-on. Alone. And now she's raising a child with nothing but love. That ain't weakness. That's heroism. The woman slunk away. I stood there, stunned. Leonard helped me back to my booth. We talked for hours. He told me how he and Jasper had once made a pact. If anything ever happened, they'd look after each other's wives. "But I failed," he said quietly. "Didn't know Jasper passed until it was too late. If I had—" "You didn't fail," I said, squeezing his hand. "You came when it mattered." Leonard became my anchor after that. He moved into the guest house behind Loretta's. Built August a cradle by hand. Drove me to appointments. Cooked every Tuesday night and told stories about Jasper until I laughed so hard I cried. He never asked for anything. Just showed up. And in the quiet moments, when the world wasn't watching, I let myself feel something I thought had died with Jasper. Hope. August came early. A rainy Tuesday in October. The nurses didn't believe it until they checked twice. 79 years old and giving birth without a single complication. When I held him in my arms, tiny and pink and blinking into the world like he'd seen galaxies before this one, I whispered, "You're not his. You're not mine. You're yours. And you are loved." Loretta wept. Leonard held my hand. The hospital room buzzed with warmth. Until a letter arrived. Delivered by courier. No return address. But the handwriting, I recognized it. Tight. Precise. Inside was a single page. The blood test was rigged. Ask your nurse about the vial she threw out. See. My breath caught. I turned to the nurse on duty. She turned pale. Miss Delaney, there's something I need to tell you. The nurse's hands trembled as she reached for the visitor's chair.
Miss Delaney, she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
I didn't mean to get involved. I thought it was just a lab error. But when I tried to report it, my supervisor shut it down. I narrowed my eyes. What error? She looked around the room, then leaned in close. There was a second vial. For the DNA test. A man, he said he was from the lab, came in and handed me a replacement. Said the original got contaminated during transfer. But that didn't make sense. The original had already been scanned and sealed. My mouth went dry. What happened to it? I threw it out. He pressured me. He said the test had already been verified at a higher level. I didn't want to lose my job. You threw out the one real piece of evidence? My voice cracked, louder than I meant. Baby August stirred in his bassinet. I took a deep breath. Did you even verify his ID? She shook her head slowly, tears welling in her eyes. No, I didn't. And then last night, I saw your story in the paper. I realized who you were. I'm so sorry. It felt like the walls were folding in again. After everything. After court. After the verdict. After peace. Now this. A forged test. Had Chester somehow manipulated the system, even from behind bars? Leonard came in just as the nurse excused herself. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I showed him the note. Read the nurse's words back to him. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "We need to request the hospital's surveillance footage. That'll show who entered the lab and at what time. If someone tampered with evidence, there has to be a record." I nodded, but my heart was already racing. What if the baby was Chester's? What if I'd been living a lie this whole time? Ruthie came by that afternoon. When I told her, she didn't hesitate. "I'll file a Freedom of Information request with the hospital's legal department. If they stall, I'll go public again. Let's make some noise." 3 days later, the footage came in. It showed a man in scrubs, tall, clean-shaven, entering the maternity lab with a replacement vial just minutes after my blood had been drawn. No hospital ID. No lab authorization. The badge he wore? A fake. Ruthie froze the frame. Leonard leaned closer. "I know that face." "You do." He squinted. "His name's Dennis Harlow. Used to be a mechanic in Little Rock. Got in trouble for impersonating law enforcement a while back. He and Chester were cellmates for a year." My blood turned to ice. Chester had planted him. From prison. I had walked through the world believing August was safe. Believing I was free. But Chester's handprints were still on the glass of my life. I went cold. The only option was to test August's DNA again, privately, through a third-party lab Ruthie trusted. I didn't tell the hospital. Didn't breathe a word outside the circle of people I knew I could trust. When the results came in a week later, I sat with them under the old willow tree, Jasper's tree. Leonard on one side. Ruthie on the other. Loretta rocking August beside me. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. The results were clear. 99.98% match. Chester Delaney is the biological father. The truth shattered the fantasy I had been holding like porcelain. My breath hitched. My chest burned. I turned away from everyone and pressed my hand against the bark of the tree. I whispered, "I'm so sorry, Jasper." But then, I looked back at August, sleeping peacefully, breathing gently, clutching my finger with his entire fist like I was the anchor keeping him tethered to this world. And I knew. He wasn't Chester. He wasn't poison. He wasn't a mistake. He was mine, not because of blood, but because I chose him, because I fought for him, because he deserved a chance to write his own story, free from the shadows of the man who created him. And so, I made a new plan. I met with my lawyer and added another clause to my will. My son, August, is not the legacy of his father's crimes. He is the legacy of my survival. He is to inherit all of my land, my estate, and my strength. He is to be raised with full knowledge of the truth, but never in fear of it. That night, I held him close and whispered into his tiny ear, "You were born in war, but you will live in peace, because I will build it around you." But just as I began to sleep again, to believe it was over, Ruthie showed up at my door with one more envelope. No postmark, just my name. Inside was a photo of August, taken through a hospital window, time-stamped 2 days ago. On the back, scrawled in black ink, "One day, he'll know who he really is. You can't hide forever." No signature, no initials, just that same jagged handwriting I'd seen 100 times. Chester. Even from prison, he was still watching us, still reaching, still trying to shape the future he could never live. I held the photo close to my chest. Then I stood up, and I made a call. Not to the sheriff, not to Ruthie, but to the one person I had never expected to speak to again. Chester's daughter from a previous relationship. One who had disappeared from his life decades ago, and who, according to Ruthie, had spent her entire adult life trying to prove what kind of monster her father really was. Her name was Clarabelle Monroe, and the last time she saw her father, she was 16. Now in her 50s, she answered my call like she'd been waiting for it her whole life. "I knew it was coming," she said, her voice low, measured, with a tone that felt too calm for someone tied to a man like Chester. "I just didn't know when. Or who." "Why did you disappear?" I asked her. There was a pause. Then, "Because the last time I said no to him, I lost 3 teeth and almost lost my life. He always said, 'I brought you in, I'll take you out.' He said the same thing to my mother. She vanished 6 months later. Everyone said she left. I never believed it. I felt my blood freeze. Clarabelle's voice never rose, but her words carved ice. "I've seen your face in the papers," she continued. "I saw the baby. I knew it was him. That man has been obsessed with control since before I was born. You were just the latest chapter in his book of destruction." I swallowed hard. He's still trying to get to us. Even now. He faked a DNA test. Had someone infiltrate the hospital. Took a photo of my baby through the window. "Then it's time we end it," she said. I blinked. "End it?" "I've got something," Clarabelle said. "Something I've kept in a box for 37 years. Evidence. Letters. Maps. A confession tape he made when he was drunk and didn't know I was recording. It's not just about you. Or your baby. He's been doing this for decades." She paused again, then added, "And I know where he's been hiding the worst of it." I met Clarabelle 2 days later at a roadside motel just outside Harrison. She wore a denim jacket, steel-toed boots, and a braided chain necklace. Her hair was gray at the roots, and her hands trembled only when she reached for the lock on the safe she kept under the bed. Out came a metal tin. Rusted. Cold. Heavy with memory. She laid its contents on the bedspread. Photos. Police reports. A diary. And an old cassette tape labeled, "Do Not Play, 1988. "I've played it 100 times, she said. "You should hear it once." She handed me an old Walkman, pressed play, and sat on the floor as the sound of Chester's slurred voice poured into my ears. "It's all the same. They all act like they're better than me. Magnolia, too. Jasper always got the best of everything. I had to take what was mine. They owe me. The rest blurred into rage. Names. Threats. Memories I couldn't understand. But it was enough. Enough for the parole board. Enough for the state attorney. Enough for me. We submitted everything. Clarabelle went public, after years in hiding. Ruthie's story broke the internet. Daughter of convicted rapist speaks out. He told me he'd destroy every woman who ever said no. And yet, even as the case built toward a new trial for multiple uncharged crimes, a letter arrived. From the prison. Written in Chester's handwriting. No stamp. No return address. No fingerprints. It read, "They can't keep me forever. And when I come home, I'm coming for the boy. He's all I have left." I sat by August's crib that night, listening to his breath, watching the gentle rise and fall of his tiny chest. The moonlight washed across his blanket, embroidered with little cardinals, Jasper's favorite bird. I felt the weight of every year I'd lived. Every loss. Every truth I'd buried. Every scream I never got to shout. And then I made the call. To the governor's office. To the DA. To the news networks. I gathered everything. Clarabelle's recordings. My testimony. Elise's case. The nurse's statement. The fake lab footage. And I wrote a letter that would echo across the state. This isn't just about me. It's about every woman who was silenced. Every man who stood by. Every system that failed us. My name is Magnolia Delaney. I am 80 years old. I gave birth under threat, under trauma, under judgment. But I survived. And now I demand one thing. Chester Delaney must never be released again. Not by mistake. Not by mercy. Not by loophole.
Let him rot in the silence he forced on so many others.
The world responded. A movement was born. #NeverAgainChester trended for 2 weeks. Women across the state shared their own stories. Elderly survivors. Forgotten cases. Lost daughters. Buried grief. Clarabelle stood by my side on the courthouse steps and declared her father legally dead to her. And when the parole hearing finally came, he was denied. Not just for life, but posthumously. A rare ruling. A final one. A full and total revocation of all paternal rights, claims, and any shred of control he had ever tried to wield. It was done. Really done. And yet, that night, as I rocked August to sleep in Jasper's old chair, he opened his eyes for a moment, blue like his uncle's, but warm like mine, and smiled. And I smiled back. Because for the first time since Jasper died, I felt at peace. Not perfect peace, but the kind you build, one truth, one tear, one unbroken breath at a time. The sun rose over the Arkansas hills like a soft promise. Warm, golden, gentle. The kind of light that wraps around your shoulders and whispers, "You made it." August's first birthday arrived on a Saturday. The air smelled like cinnamon and grass, and the yard was filled with people I never expected would still be in my life. Ruthie, holding a balloon. Loretta, proudly wearing an apron that said, "Retired but still in charge." Leonard, now walking slower, but still strong, stood by the grill, flipping burgers with military precision. And Clarabelle. Clarabelle, who once hid from the world, now sat proudly at the picnic table, feeding Auguste spoonfuls of mashed banana and laughing at his sticky smile. 1 year. We had survived 1 year. 12 months of whispered threats, court hearings, therapy appointments, long nights, short tempers, second-guessing, and too many diapers to count. But also, 12 months of healing. Of joy. Of small victories no newspaper would ever write about. August took his first step 2 weeks ago, barefoot across the hardwood floor, reaching out for me with chubby hands and eyes full of trust. He didn't know where he came from. He didn't know about Chester, or Jasper, or Elise. He only knew love. He only knew me. And that was the most powerful legacy I could ever give. The guests had just finished singing Happy Birthday when I stood in the middle of the yard and called for everyone's attention. I held a small wooden box, hand-carved, smooth, and sealed with a brass latch. Leonard had made it. Ruthie helped design the letter inside. Loretta embroidered the lining. It was August's legacy box, to be opened when he turns 18. I read the letter aloud, not for him, he was far too young, but for us. For everyone who helped us get here. Dear August, if you're reading this, it means you've grown strong. I hope by now you know that you were never born of hate. You were born of resistance. You were not a mistake. You were my miracle. People may tell you about where you came from. Some may whisper. Some may shout. But only you get to decide who you are. You were the final battle I didn't know I could win. You gave my last years a purpose far greater than pain. And if one day the world ever feels too heavy, remember this. Your mother, an old woman, tired and scarred, stood in the fire, faced the devil, and chose you anyway. Not because you were easy to love, but because you were mine to love. My voice cracked. No one clapped. They just stood. Still. Moved. And when I turned to August, sitting in Clarabelle's lap, face smeared with frosting, holding a tiny stuffed bird, I saw Jasper. In his smile. In his eyes. In the simple, unquestioning trust that we were safe. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the porch with Leonard. August slept in his arms, his tiny breath steady against Leonard's chest. Do you think I did the right thing? I asked quietly. Leonard looked out across the field. I think, he said slowly, you broke a curse, and that ain't something many people get to do. I nodded, holding the letter tighter. I still think about Elise, about the others, about all the women who never got their names back. You gave them a voice, he said, and you gave August a future. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the cicadas and the wind and the sound of a life rebuilt from ashes. And as the stars began to appear one by one above us, I looked up and whispered, I'm still here, Jasper. And he's okay. We're okay. In the stillness of that moment, I swear I saw a cardinal land on the fence post. It didn't stay long. Just long enough to make me believe that the ones we lose never really leave. They just fly ahead to make room for what's next. And what was next was August. A new chapter. A new name. A new story. Written not in pain, but in love.